Good morning, church. I was born in a little town on the edge of the Mississippi Delta. My parents, who were married, were quite young at 22 and 18. And like a lot of people where I come from, my father was an alcoholic and abusive. And my mother was not ready to be a mom at her age. And so at the age of 2, my parents divorced. My grandfather, on my mom's side, realized it would not be good for me to remain with my mom at such a young age. So at 2, I started living with my grandparents. Both of my grandparents grew up in the Depression. We were extremely poor. As they say where I come from, dirt poor. My grandfather, even with all he did to protect and raise me, was one of, if not the most racist people you could meet. My grandmother said he was part of the KKK in his youth. I would often hear him speak in the most vile way when it comes to black people. My grandmother was not on the same level as my grandfather, but she too was brought up in the same era as he was. I loved them very much, but they were nowhere near perfect. Before graduating high school, I had some friends, not many. I never fit into a box, really. Quite different than most people. I had only one really good friend since elementary, my best friend Percy, who happened to be black. For some reason, I had rejected my family's thinking about race. I do not say this to make myself seem better than them, because I'm not. But you must understand how big this was where I come from, how much it was a part of my life. Sometime later, I met a girl. It was just after graduation. She was black. She showed me attention, and she was very nice. And soon we were spending almost all of our time together. And soon she was pregnant. I didn't know what to do. I was 18 and really scared. How was I going to support a kid? I had early on made a vow that no matter what, I would never let my child grow up without me or have parents that were not around. A friend of mine spoke about going to the Navy. I didn't like the idea of boats. But for some reason, the Army caught my interest. And so in May of 1993, I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I had a plan to marry my girlfriend and raise my child, no matter what, and I was not going to be my father. And I did. I got married, and we moved to Fort Benning, Georgia, for my regular duty. It was okay for a while, but soon my now wife was by herself a lot, as most Army wives are. She became very disgruntled. She soon would go back home to Mississippi, and I was left in Georgia. The Army is not like regular jobs. You just can't quit for something better. But leave it to me to make great decisions. I then did something I regret to this day. I went AWOL, which is very bad. I secretly moved back to Mississippi with my wife. In my mind, it was either get divorced or possibly go to jail. Easy choice. After a couple of years of looking over my shoulder, I was released from my service. I found out that if you don't want the Army doesn't want you. But jail was not out of my future yet. I was back with my wife and now 2 children, but still had no money. I soon became really good at stealing. In a few years, I was charged with grand larceny. I was eventually convicted and sentenced to 5 years in the notorious Parchman prison in the Mississippi Delta. But for some reason, the judge showed mercy upon me. He suspended my entire sentence, and I received probation. After that, I tried to make sure my life was as normal as could be. But life isn't always normal. A few years earlier, my best friend from elementary school, Percy, was met at the University of Mississippi campus by a young man sharing his faith. He soon asked me to come to check out his church he was in. So I gathered up the kids with my wife, and we went to our first church service. I had never seen anything like that before in my life. I can't explain what I saw. Every race of people you could think of in a church. No church where I come from was multicultural. And like so many other people that have stood up here and have said the exact same thing, I thought my friend had told the evangelist who was speaking that day all about me. I would have bet money on it that he was speaking to me about me. And so I was asked to study the Bible. Both my wife and I were being taught how to become Christians from the scriptures, and we made it through several Bible studies. The evangelist who was studying with me challenged me to move my family, leave my job, leave the house I was in, and move to Memphis an hour and a half away. Usually you don't get asked to do all these things when you just want to join a church. But I was all for it. Nothing had ever touched me like what I was experiencing in the Memphis church. So I talked to my wife about it. She liked the church, but she did not want to move that far away. She asked, why can't we find a church here? So we stopped going. I started attending a mainline church and got baptized. I was hoping she would join me. She never did. Eventually, I stopped going. Things just sort of went back to the way they were after that, but they didn't stay that way. Soon my wife started hanging out with friends a lot, but secretly she had ulterior motives. She had started having feelings involving same-sex attraction. And within a year, she left me for a new relationship with a woman. Within a year, my marriage and life just fell apart, and I couldn't stop it. You see, I had promised myself that I would never get divorced. It was the biggest fear in my life since a little child. She said I was not the problem. She just had a desire for something else. So one day, she moved out with the children, and I was left at home by myself. I sat down on the couch and had no idea what to do. Then it dawned on me. I knew exactly what had happened. I chose my wife and what she desired over God. So that night, which was a Saturday, I called my best friend back. I asked him if I could come to church the next morning. I started studying the Bible again, and on February 16th, 2001, I was baptized the correct way. In just a few weeks, my life had been totally transformed. I was in my house with my wife and children 1 month. The next month, I was living with a bunch of single brothers in the church, participating in tons of Bible studies with people who were looking for answers like me. About 6 months after my conversion, the campus and singles ministry Okay. Said, am I going to do this? I knew exactly where it was going to happen to. All right. About 6 months after my conversion, the campus and singles ministry, which I was a part of in Memphis, had to get together with a new church planning. In Jackson, Mississippi, about 3 hours away. Something happened that day that is as clear to me today as it was then. I remember walking up a hill from the lake we were meeting at with a brother of mine in the church. And I saw the most beautiful creature God ever made. And I'm not lying when I say that. Not only was she pretty, but she was very spiritual. I'll get back to her in a minute. Making me cry, stuff. All right, let's start again. Many people will tell you that when you become a Christian, their lives change completely, and mine did in many ways. But for those 2 years, as an early Christian, it was very difficult for me. I was learning about God and how to be a disciple. But the one thing I wanted more than anything, a family, I had lost. This led me into a deep depression, while at the same time leading the singles ministry. Soon I became disillusioned with the church and with God. I became a Christian. I was trying to live as a disciple of Christ, but God had not restored my marriage. I soon started an immoral relationship and fell away from the church. I was not in a good place. For almost a year, I ran from God. But if you ever tried that, it's impossible. I eventually looked around and saw that there was nothing good happening in my life. A good friend of mine in the church had once told me, once you really, I mean really deep down, know the truth about God, you will always know the truth. So I came back to the church and back to God. Soon after my divorce was final, being restored to the fellowship, I started going on dates in the church. And a friend of mine reminded me about this girl named Kenya, who I had met a couple years earlier. I never forgot her. He was dating a friend of mine from Jackson and asked would I like to go out with her on a double date. I did, and I've never been on another date with her or anyone else. So I was married 9 months later and now have 4 children. When most people get up here and speak about their testimony, it's often about them seeing the scriptures and telling about how it changed their lives. And that happened to me also. But the scriptures aren't the most important reason why I believe in God and why I'm a disciple of Christ. It's all about the times I look back on my life and I see God's guiding hand protecting me and restoring me after so many things have been broken in my life so often. Even when I, a resentful, ungrateful child, was usually the cause. He has been the unseen conductor, orchestrating my life like a symphony. I didn't see him during those times, but when I look back, I can't help but see him. The fear of loss and rejection caused me to turn my back on God and try to forget about him. But he doesn't forget about us. Amen, church. Thank you.